Hi! In this lesson, we are going to take a look at pseudo-class selectors. A pseudo-class is a keyword added to a selector that specifies a special state for the element to be selected. They are very cool in that they let us apply styling to an element when that element is in a special state. The syntax is quite simple. Just add colon and then the name of the pseudo-class to the selector. Again, remember to avoid any space, otherwise the browser will interpret that as a descendant selector. There are quite a few pseudo-classes, and we'll see just a couple of them. You can refer to the Mozilla documentation linked in the lesson description to further explore the other pseudo-classes, but be aware that some of them are widely supported by your browser vendors, while others are not. A good way to always be up to date on what feature is supported by the major browsers is to bookmark and often check on caniuse.com. This fantastic website will give you extensive information not only on CSS properties and keyword support, but also on HTML5 elements and even JavaScript language features. So check it out and store it in your favorite bookmarks. Let's have a look at a couple of pseudo-selectors. So let's get back to our editor and reopen the file we worked in the last video, the relationships HTML file. Let's open it again in the browser if it's not already open. So if you remember, the last time we worked on this file, we had to face the challenge in order to select only the first H1 title in the article sections, because we had two sections and both of them were exposing an H1 title within them. In order to be able to select only the first one, we ended up adding an additional class to qualify the section as the section containing the latest articles and the other section as the section containing the archived article. And that worked quite well, of course. So we ended up using this kind of selector. Well, this was the last test that we did on the selector, just to show that you can combine them and be even more specific. But there is another way to get to the same result without having to add an additional class just for selecting an element. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to add an additional class, especially when this class doesn't add any kind of meaning to the element. We are indeed able to get to the same result and select only the H1 that is the direct child only of the first section using a pseudo class. Let me show you how. We target the section, we use the column because we are going to use a pseudo class, and we are going to use first child. This is the keyword for the pseudo class. If we go to the Mozilla documentation page for the pseudo classes, we have a list of all of the supported pseudo classes. We drill down to first child, we click on the link, and we have an explanation of what first child does. First child represents any element that is the first child element of its parent. This is the syntax that we just used, the element, the column, and the first child. And what it basically does is that what it tells the browser to do is please select this section only if this section is the first child of its parent. So if we go back to our document hierarchy in the Chrome Inspector and we have a look at the sections, so we have a div with a class of main content, and as children of this div we have the first section, the second section, and an aside. So we can indeed say that this section is the first child of its parent. So we can target this section using a pseudo class instead of a class. So if we refresh our browser, we will see that the first H1 is red, but not the second one. And we just used a pseudo class to select it. And if we go to the H1 and we select the H1, we can see in the styles panel that the rule is applied to this H1 element because this H1 is a child of the section that is the first child of its parent. Be aware when you use pseudo-classes that they are fully supported by the browser vendor that you are using. If we go at the bottom of the page explaining the pseudo-class, you will have a table that tells you what is the compatibility of the pseudo-class against the major browser vendors that are on the market. For example, the pseudo-class is supported from Internet Explorer version 7 onward, so it's not a problem. The same way, we can use another pseudo-class to target the last child of an element. So if instead of using first child, we use last child, and this is another pseudo-class. Let's go back to the Mozilla documentation for a moment. Let's go to the list, and we see that we also have last child. And the last child represents any element that is the last child element of its parent, similarly to the first child. If we save our changes to the editor and we refresh, we don't see any title in red. And you could wonder why I don't see any title in red. I mean, this is the second section. But if you think about it carefully, this second section is not the last child of its parent, because the main content has a section as a child, another section as a child, and then a side as a child. So being this, the list of children, the way they are laid down in the browser, the last child of this div is an aside, is not a section. So the rule that we just wrote, saying I want to select the H1 that is a direct child of a section that is the last child of its parent, does not apply, because we have no sections that are the last child of their parent. So if we want to target, for example, this section, this specific section, without using a class, there is a way to do that using another pseudo class. Let's go back. That is nth child. This is quite easy and complex at the same time. The nth child allows us to select a child that comes at a specific position within the children of a container. For example, we can use nth child, and this has a specific notation, parentheses, and the position of the section amongst its siblings. That means that we are going to apply this color red to the H1, that is an immediate child of a section that comes first between the children of its parent. So if we save and we refresh, we again see that the first section has a red title, and the rule applies to this title, whereas the second section doesn't have any red title. If we want to target the second section, we can just say that we want to select the second child, the section that is the second child of its parent. If we go back and we refresh, we indeed see that the second section now has a red title and not the first one. This specific pseudo-class accepts also keywords and formulas. For example, instead of using 1 and 2, you can use a keyword odd or even that works the same way. Odd or even, as you can see, but they give you an additional advantage. So let's duplicate the first two sections. So we have 4 sections in total. Let's give it a number, post 3 and posts 4. Let's put the end child back to 1, as we were doing before. Let's save the file and refresh. So we have 4 sections: latest post, archived posts, post 3 and posts 4, and only the first one has an H1 with the color red, because we targeted specifically the H1 of the section that is the first child of its parent. And we can go on and say, I want to select the second section instead of the first one, and indeed it will work. I want to select the third section, and indeed it will work. Or I want to select the fourth section, and you will get what you want. Now let's make it a little bit more complex. What if you want to give a red title to alternating sections? We want to create sort of an alternating list of sections where the first, the third, the fifth, and so on are red. In order to do so, we can use formulas or we can use keywords. The pseudo-class gives us keywords to ease the pain of writing a formula, and these keywords are even. That means all of the even row children will get the color red. So the second one and the fourth one. Or odd, if you want to apply this rule only to odd children of type section, of course. And you get the first and the third. You can even be more flexible using handmade formulas that you can write by yourself. This is a little bit more tricky. If you look at the Mozilla documentation again for the nth child, you will see that the formula has this syntax, an plus b. Things get a little bit more complex. In layman terms, we can say that an represents the cycle size and b represents a counter. What does this mean is that the cycle size is the number of elements that we want to iterate over. So we want to, for example, repeating the same rule every 2 elements. This is the cycle size. And for these 2 elements that we are repeating over and over, we want to select the first one. If we do this and we go back to the document, we see that we get the same result when we were using odd. Odd is just a shortcut for this formula. That means that every 2 sections we want to highlight, we want to select the first one. And then the formula will be repeated over and over and over. So if you have 8 sections, you will get the first, the third, the fifth section selected by the rule. If you want to select the second section every 2 sections, you just increment the counter. So the cycle size is 2, so every 2 sections the rule will be repeated, and you want to select the second one. So you save and refresh, and you have the same result that we were having before using even as the keyword. But of course you can even create formulas more complex than that. You can cycle every 4 elements, and every 4 elements you want to select only the third one. And we get only the third element selected in a block of 4. So if this block is repeated, you will also get the third element of the second block selected. So it's quite a powerful tool. Be aware, of course, of the support in the major browser vendors. If you go to the to the bottom of the page, you will see that this particular pseudo-class is supported only from IE version 9, whereas in the other browser the support is quite there. I have to be honest, this is quite an advanced and not so frequently used pseudo-class. There are many other pseudo-classes that are quite widely used and supported in all browsers, and we are going to see a few of them now. For example, you have hover that is used when you hover with your mouse on an element, and we can easily see it in action. Let's go back to our editor. So let's suppose, for example, that we want to change the color of the more link when we hover on the link. So when we pass with the mouse on top of the link in the page, we can do that easily. So we already have targeted the links as yellow here. We are targeting the anchor link, that is a direct sibling of a paragraph that comes after the paragraph, and that is contained within an article. So we are targeting directly this anchor. We can add another rule, that is is basically the same, but we want to target a state of the anchor. Because remember, the pseudo class often represents state of an element. So this selector will be matched when we are hovering with the mouse on top of the element. So when the anchor is hovered with the mouse, we can do something like changing its color. And we want it to be orange. This is very cool. Now save, go back to the browser and refresh. Nothing changes. Our links are yellow. But when we hover on the links with the mouse, they become orange. And when we get out from the boundaries of the link, it becomes yellow again. That is because the rule is not matched anymore, but the previous rule is still matched. So the over rule takes precedence over the normal state of the anchor, because the anchor is already targeted by this rule and is yellow. But when we hover on the link, this rule takes precedence and color the anchor in orange. So this is another example how we can use the pseudo classes.